Okay, I think we should start. Welcome, everyone. We have about 1/3 of the people that did register, which is not too much, but let's see if others will join us later on. I'm very happy to see you. For us, it's the first EuroDIG activity of the year. And let me put it that way, it was a kind of spontaneous idea, in particular after the events that happened in the US with the Capitol riots. But it's also a consequence of our first publication on media and content and decade of change. This idea was born quite some years ago already, that we look back on a decade of change or on a decade of discussions on internet governance and the various clusters that we have at EuroDIG. So media and content was the first brochure because we have our Yrjö, and Yrjö took the pen and with his skills as a journalist and with his experience as the subject matter expert on this category, he put together this review of a decade of discussion. But you will soon see that we offer other brochures on other EuroDIG clusters. For instance, on security and crime, this is just underway, but the other clusters like innovation or human rights are also to follow, and we hope we will find the funds to support the drafting of these brochures. And those two things together, those two elements, the publication of this first brochure and the events happening in the US, had so many issues to discuss, and that we said it would be too long to wait until June, until we have it on our EuroDIG agenda and can discuss it. We have to take that hot potato and make something out of it immediately. And as there is always the call for more intersessional and inter-annual work, so we said, let's do a virtual meeting, so that we are also used to virtual meetings, and it's actually quite easy to organize them. So I will stop my intervention here. You know that the meeting will be recorded, so you will be able to look at it later on. But I would also like to just give you a hint. Next week, we have the second planning meeting to prepare the EuroDIG agenda for 2021. And of course, I hope to see you there again, where we will discuss in detail which other topics should be discussed at this year in EuroDIG. Hopefully not only virtually, hopefully at least partly in the face-to-face meeting. I still keep my fingers crossed that we will have a chance to do a hybrid meeting in Trieste at least. But we'll give you an update on this next week, where we discuss the program for Trieste, or for, let's put it that way. We discuss the program for June, and we will see what will be possible. With this, I would like to hand over to Yrjö. He is moderating the session, managing the panel. Yrjö, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Sandra. As Sandra mentioned, this EuroDIG Extra was improvised, and let's see how it goes. But so was actually the first EuroDIG in 2008. We did it at a fairly short notice, so that apologize for all if any mishaps happen, but this is what we try to do. And again, for the publication that Sandra asked me to talk about, I want to thank Sandra, of course, and others of the EuroDIG that I had the honor of being the first to put together a publication of one of the areas, one of the subject matters of EuroDIG between 2008 and 2020. I also want to thank Mark Carwell, my editor, and Rainer for the technical layout of this publication. The link to it will be found is on the EuroDIG website. So media was certainly one of the industries that was hit early and hard by the winds of change of the internet, and it became what you could call a perfect storm over the years. Now, in the beginning, people at the traditional media, of which I was one long time ago, we felt that it's nice to have, feedback to what we were saying, and it's nice to have social media sort of people telling us something back that was better than just the letters to the editor or the phone-in programs of television. But gradually, what was just a nice sideshow in the beginning became a competitor and then a threat to traditional media. At least it was so seen, so felt. So at the EuroDIG 2016, we took an article that had been written 20 years before by Bill Gates. It was entitled "Content is the King." And we tried to see whether content still was the king. And the answer was yes, but actually we found that what had been pretty much the tail of the media dog the tail was now wagging the entire dog. Content was still king, but it was created to a lesser extent by professional journalists and traditional media, and more by users or all sorts of operatives who post as users. And unfortunately, in the most recent years, the emphasis of this section of EuroDIG sessions has been more and more on negative things, negative aspects of social media, and the dominance of social media giants, and the business model, which some writers have called surveillance capitalism. So we were discussing fake news, or more accurately, disinformation, information disorder, its impact on elections, and how governments were planning to tackle what was called online harms. Representatives of big platforms were participating at the discussions, which was good, of course, and they have been telling us what the platform themselves are planning and trying to do to this situation. And a parallel theme at many EuroDIGs has been media literacy, digital literacy, which is really the last line of defense here. And now we come to this theme of this EuroDIG Extra, the first of its kind. I'm sure we're going to return to it at the next regular EuroDIG in Trieste, I hope, or virtual next June, at the end of June this year. But as Sandra said, this topic was so something that needed to be treated fresh and hot, and while we have not yet actively forgotten about the events of the last days of the Trump administration. Now, the banning of an incumbent president, who is called the mightiest person in the world and the leader of free world and all that, banning from such a person from social networks was a stunning event, and it caused interesting discussions and reactions around the world, not the least by other politicians. It opened a lot of questions about who's the boss, who political leaders or CEOs of the giant platforms. And so to discuss this situation, we have a panel. Can I have the, yes, can I have the slide up? Yes, thank you. We have Mia-Petra Kumpula-Natri, who is the member of European Parliament from the Progressive Alliance and Socialists and Democrats from Finland. We have Maria-Luisa Stasi, who is Senior Legal Officer of Article 19. Article 19 is a British human rights organization with a specific mandate and focus on the defense and promotion of freedom of expression. We have Mira Milosevic, who is Executive Director of Global Forum for Media Development. That GFMD is an international network of around 2,000 journalist support and media development organizations in about 70 countries. And moderators, me and Michael. Michael will take care of the questions and comments on the chat. And I hope that there will be lots of them. We answer them. We try to answer, or our panel will try to answer them. But now let's get going. And first, I would like to ask Maria-Luisa from Article 19 to remind us of the events that led to the banning of Trump from Twitter and also other social networks. So, Maria-Luisa, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to have the possibility to be part of this indeed extremely timely conversation. My role in the next couple of minutes is just to remind us of the main facts that led to the deplatformization of Trump. As we all know, the political mandate of the ex-president of the United States has been characterized by a massive use of social media to communicate with the public. It's fair to say that it has been the main channel for communication used by Mr. Trump. And I think what we can also identify is an increasing relevance of two topics that have been discussed over those platforms over 2020. And those topics gave us kind of the possibility to look at the first hints of this escalation that then happened afterwards. So when after the the reaction in between the 6th and the 7th of January of Twitter and Facebook CEOs and other platform CEOs to remove or suspend Trump's account, many people, they said that these people, they've taken a decision acting too late. Why they say so? So which kind of hints we had or evidence we had on the table before? I'd say I've noted down a few kind of milestones or a few moments where our attention was definitely raised by conflicts between Trump and the governance board of those platforms. I would like to point our attention to starting from May last year. So May last year, it was more or less the first time where we saw both Twitter and Facebook taking reactions against some Trump's Twitter. The first step were taken because of potentially misleading information that were distributed, They were announced via tweets. Those potential misleading information referred at this first stage referred to the mail-in ballots. So we were in the framework of the elections, and I think, as I mentioned, there are two main topics where we can observe this escalation happening all over 2020. One is election, the other one is COVID-19. So at the very beginning, the problem was to tackle the potential misleading, the misinformation that was distributed over those platforms. First reaction was quite mild in a way, the first reaction from those platforms, because they used the mechanism of the labels. So they added some labels on at the bottom of the tweets, informing the public that the content of the tweet was potentially misleading. And Twitter specifically also offered to the users links to additional information. So the idea was to provide users more information about the context where this misleading information landed. Both, I would say, the CEO of Twitter and Facebook at the very beginning, they took a stand and said, we're not going to fact check what politicians say, what Trump says. We're just going to offer broader information about the context. So the idea was that they didn't want to position themselves as arbiters of truth, but on the other side, they wanted to kind of warn people that what was said in those tweets or posts was potentially misleading. They didn't, the choice at the beginning was not to remove those contents, and it was explained, I'm now referring specifically to Twitter, but we have a similar approach for Facebook. It was explained by referring to the public interest policy. So the concept behind this public interest policy is that even if politicians, they say something which is potentially misleading, there is an interest of the public to have that content up, and because the public has a general interest to know what politicians say, because this is an essential element of democracy. They will then be more aware when they choose who to vote for the next election, or they will have more awareness about what actually politicians are delivering after the election. So that was the main reason why they choose not to remove the content, to leave it there, but to kind of adopt those ancillary means. We were there back there. We started in May, as I mentioned, or I think that was one of the main moments where we saw the beginning of this friction. Again in May, Twitter took another initiative with regard to some tweets that were not about potentially misleading information concerning the elections, but they were about the wake of civil unrest following the facts in Minneapolis. So this time, the policy that was relevant was not necessarily that about disinformation, but it was about incitement to violence, or to better say, the glorification of violence, which Twitter believed to be against its own rules. And there again, we had some labels to those tweets. A strong escalation happened in November, in the days of the election and following the end of the elections. Just to give you a perception, some data, the day after the election, Trump issued about, put out about 16 tweets, 7 of which were labeled as potentially misleading by the platform. So yeah, more than a third. Once again, no tweet was removed, but what Twitter tried to do was also to avoid that tweets became viral, so that it avoids the tweets to be retweeted or to be shared or to be liked. And then we came to the facts of January. But even in January, at the beginning, the Twitter kind of sent some warning to Trump just before taking the decision of completely suspending the account. So as it is more or less clear from these facts, we had different attempts to kind of counteract potentially misleading or potentially dangerous in terms of glorification of violence or incitement to violence tweets coming from Trump. So it was not a sudden episode or decision that came out of nowhere. If you look at Facebook, the progression is pretty similar. The only main difference that I can see is that at the very beginning, Facebook, while Twitter decided to try to limit the diffusion of the tweets from the very beginning, so impeding to like the tweet or to retweet them, Facebook took a little longer before deciding to intervene in this way. At the beginning, it was just about labeling, but some of those tweets that were labeled as potential misinformation rose up to thousands of likes in hours, if not minutes. The second difference that I might notice while looking at the different steps in 2020 is that Facebook had to face some more disinformation in terms of COVID-19. And that was actually one of the tweets about tweets with containing disinformation of misleading information about the COVID were among those that were most problematic for the platform to manage. The reference there was to the policy related to harmful content. I'm flagging this because I think it is going to be relevant for our following discussion as well, to kind of understand that each time the companies, they claimed to use different kind of internal policies to moderate that specific content. Now, an element that I would like to highlight is that those policies are not written on stones. They've been adapted all over the months and all over the years as well. And this has happened also last year. For example, the same definition of harmful content has been elaborated and widened by the majority of those platforms during the pandemic, as to include a number of, for example, misinformation about different treatments that could be used, et cetera, et cetera. So we are talking about a work in progress. We're not talking about a very solid system or mechanism, not even, and even less. We're talking about a structure or a framework that is sufficiently transparent towards the users. All in all, I think we got there after a number of frictions. We got there after a number of attempts also by those platforms to remedy those frictions. But we might say, or we might interpret part of the debate while saying that possibly that was not enough. If at some point the major platform, they had to completely remove or suspend the account of Trump. But I think I'll stop here and I leave the space to the other speaker to start discussing the facts, the deplatformization itself and the facts after the 6th and 7th of January. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria Luisa. Thank you for pointing out that this was a pretty gradual process, and that what happened, what was not, it was like not a sort of bolt from blue skies, but there actually was this whole prehistory where also the policies that was sort of the rules basis for their action, the policies of the platforms changed. But now we have Mia-Petra Kumpula-Natri, the member of European Parliament, next. And of course, when Trump was deplatformized, that caused quite a reaction among politicians in Europe. There were pretty harsh comments on what Twitter was doing and Facebook was doing, saying that they have no business of deplatforming or closing the means of expression for politicians, political leaders. So, Mia-Petra, thank you for taking time from your MEP duties to join us, and please give us some insight from a politician's perspective to this. Please.
Thank you, Jürgen. I'm very happy to join. And unfortunately, I cannot stay the whole time, but I have to leave. In like 1 hour was done to this, and not prioritizing, but something I could not affect myself. But I very much, as a politician myself, I very much welcome this global discussion we are now having, because we all know that the role of the platforms is coming bigger and dominating in many aspects. And then when we are planning legislation, it goes like the book says, you have the opinion of the citizens, and this is like on that way, this is very welcomed example that now everybody is talking about issues and people are discussing. And then the outcome should be then that we do have a proper legislation that how the big companies also, the big platforms also should react and should do. So many can now ask that, is it real that we do not have rules set by the society, set by the democratic legislation systems for this kind of situations? And I think in this analysis, it's very important to notice the moment that closing happened, the very moment. There were rioters in the heart of the Western European, Western world democracy, I would say, because it was in US, but if something, and I guess something quite similar might happen in other democracies. And we have seen that all the democracies have not been that strong, that seems now that US succeeded and will hopefully succeed after this one. So then also the reaction from the politicians, according, you kind of, if there is a good study on this, should analyze that when positions were taken. And now I also reflect my own thinking, that I was interviewed. I'm also in the delegation to US from the European Parliament, the vice chair. So we do have a regular contacts there. And then I was asked about that, and I was asked about the riots. Even what name should be used? Was it the internal terrorism or domestic terrorism, as some people said? And I'm still talking with some terrorist researchers and science people in Finland, whether this term is well established here, was it or not, domestic terrorism. So then at that very moment, it was life-threatening moment for members of the parliament there, the congressmen and women, and it was a threat for people gathering there. And that was still that, will that escalate more, or is there ways to calm down? So in that very spectacular moment, what was to be done, and it was also then the president-elect for a couple of hours, asked Trump to come in front of the classical media and calm down the situation. And then at the same time, we knew that he had 88 million followers on Twitter, and he was like not very clear what he was said before, and it could be easily said that he was like asking people to join and marching with them, and then what was said by his son and so. So I think if I would be an academic, I would look when and how everybody was reacting to that moment, and also Twitter. So then if we go away from that very moment, I think many had the opinion that it was done too late, and also the previous speaker analyzing that when the content check came on board and the blue tag there, that check, or mentioning that there is like false information, that came quite late. If we then recognize that not very precise facts were used long, even in his position, and a kind of whole era of the post-truth society was evolving, and he was kind of the peak of the mountain, but then his amount of the followers and position was very important there. So then asking the like internal thoughts. So I think that was also the case, that something Parliament underlines all the time, that something, and the Commission, EU, what is illegal offline should be transposed to be illegal online. And then again, if you have like national security in question, then there is quite much you can do. And if this is predicted that at the moment that was national security, and then if you analyze how divided, how aggressive some Trump supporters are, and they pose a security threat, then analyzing going deeper there is an issue. So we can see that even Vice President for Value and Transparency Jourova backed tweet content moderation policies and said that I support Twitter in efforts to develop and implement transparent, clear and consistent moderation policy. And this is not about the censorship. But later she clarified that even though I believe Trump's irresponsible incitement to violence deserved action, it is clear that we cannot continue like this. So the fact that a big firm can silence a sitting US president based on unclear criteria and without oversight can be dangerous for free speech. So then even you understood the situation and a moment, that was also my reaction that yes, that was needed in that moment, because globally we were following what will happen, what he will do. Will he calm down and say that now this is now too far, you went too far, and then another way that he would promote people to continue, go around the nation to continue. So you can think that as a security act also. But then the question is that who did it and why and how? And then we do have a lot of politicians reacting that the Trump Twitter ban, and this is Merkel, was very problematic, and the fundamental right of freedom to opinion should be determined by rule of law and government, not according to the decision of management of the social media platform. Thierry Breton, also working with digital issues, said that the fact that CEO can pull the block of POTUS loudspeaker without any checks and balance is perplexing. And we kind of these shocked reactions and so. And also I noticed that Navalny, quite familiar for all the MEPs now after our resolutions, said that if this is the line, how on earth can my Twitter account still be open if it's then the government to decide? So this then opens another perspective that Merkel, who comes from the democracy and with the juridical proper juridical systems in her country, can say that determined by rule of law and government. But then I also want to elaborate the question of the government then deciding who may have the vote. So I more would call the rule of law to be in place in system, and then after having the juridical system. And now I quote what our European Parliament report on DSA by Mr. Völken, country fellow for Merkel, said, MEP, stress about the rights and as regards content moderation, stresses that the responsibility for enforcing the law must rest with public authorities, considers that the final decision on the legacy of user-generated content must be made by the independent judiciary and not private commercial entity. And this is about taking down content, and now this is taking down the whole loudspeaker. So we do not have a position directly to this one example kind of thing, but it goes very close to the content moderation. So I think I want to add here to the discussion also that when we talk about the core value of the society, and namely the democracy, the cybersecurity has already long underlined the necessity for the data literacy understanding. So kind of how people in general can understand that which is fake and which is not fake, and it gets impossible with the technological idea that comes more and more. But then so there is how resilient society is, and it was funny because I asked the Finnish military from the Ministry of Defense lately about the cybersecurity, how much they do with the EU and so on and so on, and he said our strength in Finnish society is our literacy and education. And so this is also the case, that how much can we be resilient when we broader the question, which we don't need to go today, but then underline the facts that this is complicated, and we really need to call for the rules. And I'm happy to hear the next discussion also take on board the actors themselves, because if there are rules in place, they have to follow them. If there are not rules, it's quite hard to complain what they do. So we should be able to set the rules, and then their responsibilities can be also checked and balanced.
Thank you, Mia-Petra. There's a lot of discussion actually in the chat, but before going to that, just a quick question to Maria-Luisa. Your organization is all about freedom of expression, and just a quick comment from that point. Whose freedom of expression should we care about here?
Well, the easy answer to this question is we should care about free expression of everyone. We might think that there's some categories, if we look at social media, for example, or even media, there might be some categories of people where their speech should be treated in a different way. For example, I mentioned when I was providing a quick summary of Facebook and Twitter specific actions towards Trump tweets last year, that Twitter has this public interest policy, and it considers that the speech of politicians should be sometimes treated differently. So it should be kept online because it's in the public interest of people to kind of look at that content, even if it's misleading. So we might consider that there are different, that there could be different approaches depending on whether we're talking about public interest information or any other kind of user-generated content. Of course, once again, one of the problems that we have is how we set, how we draw the lines, how we define what is public interest content, and where are the thresholds. And there, I think the main problem we have is to decide whether this exercise can be left to the companies, so to the private companies only, and whether we can actually pretend that these companies act in a way that is compliant with human rights standards. As a free speech organization, this is what we call for. We call for it because we think that these platforms, they do have a huge power over the flow of information in society. And this goes at individual level. So they impact tremendously what I see, what I'm exposed to, what I access, what I share, and how I do this, but also at a collective level. And in that second case, they strongly impact our democratic societies as well. So we do pretend from these companies to act in a way that is compliant with human rights because of the specific material they deal with when they provide their service. It's difficult, though, when it comes to kind of find a balance in between what we can expect from private powers and what we can expect from public powers. As Mia-Petra has excellently pointed out, the right way to do so, to kind of when we want to solve content moderation issues, might not be to attribute the possibility to decide to governments. But we should rather go to the third way, which is the rule of law way, which is having systems that are compliant, as I mentioned before, with human rights standards on free expression. Now, free expression is not an absolute right. Sometimes can be limited, but it can be limited only in certain circumstances and with certain guarantees. So what we need to do, we need to try to make sure that the policies of this platform that limit free expression in certain cases, like when it's about a tweet that incites to violence and it can actually lead to violence, it's removed or hidden. But this should not be a one-man call. It should be the outcome of a well-established process, a well-established system to react to those cases. So this is, I think, what is still lacking. I've mentioned that in 2020, those companies, they have tried with some attempts to use the label, etc. But the reality, the other side of the coin is that while they were doing this, they were keeping using their usual business model that in a way has definitely contributed to the polarization of discourse. I mean, I'm not saying anything revolutionary when I state that Trump has used the social media to achieve some objective in terms of polarization of the public debate. And it has also used it to kind of send certain messages to have divided society. So to act on a specific content, specific piece of content, to forget about the broader picture, how these business models work and what they lead to, it's to us is to look just only a very, very minor part of the problem. What we suggest is to take a step back and to say, okay, we do need better rules for content moderation, and we do need to call for those rules to respect human rights. But on the other side, let's look at the market where these platforms operate. Let's look at the power, the immense power they have over the flow of information, because we're talking about a very, very few players only. Do we really want the power over our main communication channels to be concentrated in a few hands? Or would it be better for society, for democracy, to have a decentralized system with different options, different models, different business models, and different rules for content moderation? Maybe part of the problem can be solved only if we work on the markets and not only on the content moderation systems. So this might be another angle to look at that, I guess. I'll stop here because I know other people, they have excellent thoughts to share. So I don't want to take too much time.
Thank you, Maria Luisa. Now I would like to ask Michael, who has been following the discussion on the chat, to, well, either you could make a summary of what has been said, but you could also perhaps give the floor to some of them who have been expressing themselves in the chat. So, Michael, please.
Thank you, Rio. Can everybody hear me? Hear me okay? Good. So there's actually a few really good questions that have been asked. Everyone's given some really good interventions in the chat so far. I think there are three individuals, there are three comments that really struck me. One was from Jorn, another was from Wout, and another one was from Andre. So perhaps Andre, Wout, or Jorn, if any of you would like to come in and just kind of restate your question and open that up for discussion. But I think that might be better than me just reading off the chat. Not everybody at once.
Okay. Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Andre,
Yes. Okay. So my question was around the fairness regarding Amazon's takedown of Parler. You also mentioned another situation that happened in 2017. The biggest problem for me is that if you simply give 24 hours for a social media to kill or to fix a problem that's systematic, that Facebook hasn't been able to fix in years, and Twitter as well, it doesn't seem very fair to give them 24 hours to do that. In fact, it seems that the outcome would be inevitable. You are actually threatening someone to close down their social network within 24 hours, and it's going to be impossible to respond in a way that's not going to happen. So my biggest issue here is, what about fairness? If you take Facebook, even if you report 100, 1,000 times all of the offending content on Facebook, in the last few months or maybe in the last year, the result is always it doesn't go against the community standards. Well, we know it does. I've also seen people, and me included, that had perfectly legitimate content that had no problem whatsoever, but this was flagged by artificial intelligence as a false positive. So my question is, you cannot appeal this. This is impossible to appeal with Facebook. With Twitter, this is a bit better. But the question is, what's the fairness here? With Facebook, there is no Amazon, there is no Microsoft Azure, there is no Google Clouds that can turn off Facebook if they are offending this, and they are much worse than Parler, for instance. So my question is, they are self-regulating. Shouldn't we as members of the public and governments, etc., be regulating Facebook and offering them heavy fines to solve this problem, and especially to solve the problem quickly? Because all of the businesses that were censored in the last year for false positives, many of them have actually gone out of business without any legitimate reason. And Facebook's answer is, I'm sorry, we have some community standards, we have some situation in which this is free. Even if you lose your business, this is not our fault. So this has to be in some way regulated. Now, I have no idea what's the best way to do this, but this was my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. And Jorn, you had come off mute for a second. You had a really good question, I think, as well.
Well, thank you. Well, it struck me that in Germany, most politicians were positive to the censoring of politicians because they said it was censoring Trump. And since they don't like Trump, as like many, they didn't see the general problem, but they saw the actual action as being positive. My question was, I got the impression that the reaction of Twitter was kind of opportunistic. So they reacted to Trump in the last day of his office. So they got friend with the new administration, but they wouldn't have done so in the first days of his office, because then they would have been afraid of regulation. So actually, social networks are afraid of a lot of regulation, and they are reacting and they are censoring because politicians tell them to do so. And my impression from COVID was that in the beginning of the pandemic, there was quite some official misinformation about it. Think about masks, think about any kind of social distancing that was called racism, think about the travel restrictions that were questioned by the WHO. So these things were problematic. And in these kind of situations, isn't it very important to leave the space of opinions open and not censor because there's an official agency saying something and saying everything else is not true, while they might as well be wrong too? Thank you.
Thank you, Jorn. And just very, very quickly, that's also a good element about this. We often talk about media content and its intersection with trust. And so how do we build trust if there's no open spaces for debate, but at the same time, how then do we also limit misinformation? Because of that, it's a very interesting dynamic. And having said that, Wout, did you want to come in as well with some of the questions that you had or some of the points that you were making? It's also okay if you don't, but you're unmuted, but no, we can't hear you.
Can I react to the questions now or later?
Let's just see. I think about yeah, if it's not working, maybe try disconnecting your audio and coming back on. Or okay, no worries. Wout's just saying I'll if it's okay with there, I'll just read them real quick. Wout said, for years the platforms had been asked to moderate content when and where necessary. Self-regulation was called for. Now it is here, and the question is whether this is what the world needs. And see Jorn's question. The opposite is the judicial system, which could take years. What would be the middle way that does not, that does right to, that does offer immediate action if necessary, as well as judicial oversight and redress? And then he says, the discussion is not new, and lessons from the 1920s and 30s must be relearned. That violence in combination with uncertainty coming from economic changes drives many people towards populistic politicians who in turn goad the violence onwards while always being misquoted when confronted. Not acting could lead to extreme situations. And then he refers to the January 6th situation as, luckily for the US and for the wider world, it was unorganized and almost like a carnival gathering. But free speech is the greatest good. But how do we deal with this, with that, with the above when being allowed for free speech? So again, it kind of connects to what Andre and Jorn were saying as well. And with that, I think, Yurio, we can open the floor to our panelists, or as well to anyone else who wants to comment.
Thank you, Michael. Wood was asking for what would be the middle way, and I think that is the big question. Anybody want to react to that? Yes.
Go ahead and unmute me. Go ahead,
yes,
please.
I'll speak a bit later to the question that I'm supposed to respond to. It's a pleasure to be here. Just to say it's a fascinating discussion. Just a reflection on the 20s and 30s. It's interesting that broadcasting was a new technology at that time, and that we were just, societies were figuring out how to go about using them for political and information purposes. And it's interesting that it took 20 years or even more for instance, America to adopt something called fairness doctrine, arranging how do we represent and present political views in broadcasting. It took the same amount of time for the World Press to come after the Second World War to establish World Association of Newspapers, working together not to repeat the mistakes of the press in Germany before the war, etc. So it takes a long time, unfortunately, for communities and for societies to figure out how to use this new technology. And I think we are in the similar kind of position here, that there is so many bits and pieces that we need to figure out how to use for the benefits of societies. And unfortunately, I don't see a shortcut, even though the threats and the needs are great, but I'll go into details a bit later.
Mira, actually, I think that this would be a good point to continue about what I originally asked you to think of. That is to say, what has happened?
Petra wants to respond.
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
If I can answer the question, yes.
Okay,
if I can answer
yes.
Questions, yes, thanks, because I need to go in a few minutes.
Yeah, sorry.
So this is also a great opportunity to have one more comment round. So for the Jörn, I think you're right. the reaction from the big business came the day that they understood that they need to work with these Democrats. And I'm very much leaning to Democrats openly, but still I dare to say that also if you look at all the campaigning resources, they help the Democrat side, and that makes things a little bit more complicated. That if you look at the financing of the campaigns, and then what is the payback? Can the Democrats remain enough independent of seeing the legislative needs that is to be done? For example, the ideas that now have taken up more by 48 states that they do have the market power that they overuse. So then splitting up the companies is one way. The European way seems to be more giving rules that if you're big, even more responsibilities. And this is the DSA, DMA world. So these are the way, and then linking this to what is needed on the middle term. Nobody wanted to react because it's too good question that how do we solve this immediately, because we have reached too much the burdensome everyday life worries. But I would guess that what we do have the rules, and then we do have the self-regulation. The third is, of course, the general acceptance. So all these negative talks can nowadays, with the millennials acting, do the big changes. Like we see that hedge funds are old-fashioned. They go with the social media, which is moving the stock markets nowadays. So something similar, once we have a strong enough will that we will not accept this one. So that is maybe the path we want to nowadays do. One more legislative need we probably need to do, and at least a lot of pressure, is that these algorithms that still favor ugly content. And then how on earth can you monetize just the thing that is the most dangerous and ugliest? And before I finish, I want to share with you my very big worry on the biggest hyper threat now is not Trump. It is the campaigns for anti-vaccination acceptance. That we see happening everywhere online, and that's horrible. We know again the big money talks, the Russians campaigning in Eastern Europe, where they have still a lot of channels and an understanding of the language, that Western vaccinations are bad. And then overall, the general acceptance of the vaccines goes very low. And then we know how to divide the nation. You say that yes or no for anything, and now it seems to be vaccines. So that very expensive for society in many ways, also with the lives, but also economically, it takes longer. So that was for the what I was to say for vote. And then with the Andre, of course, the fairness is nothing there if you think the business that who can quickly take down. So it reminds me of the old discussion, too big to fail. So that these sizable companies seems to have a different rules, if rules at all. I've learned by heart that Facebook has 32,000 people working with the content and blah, blah, blah. And then the first practice I had as been serving parliament for 6.5 years was the copyright, that can we do anything? And it's a content question. And then we saw the all variety. And then I think there that will YouTube leave Europe totally if we make too strictly regulating wishes? Or is it then the content regulation? At the same time, we know that they immediately then you have a certain amount of followers or a content that is having clicks, you get an offer to start working for them and remuneration. So the content moderation is there. It is that by whom, how, and then it may not be used wrong, but the kind of tools that is acceptable need to be used for better. So anything we can do that all this good vibes and energy we spend in social media to turn it for something good. And I think this Humankind book motivates us to see that some other history is possible even here. I very much apologize because it's very interesting discussion. My assistant will stay online, so I will get critics from each detail. You will still talk, and I'm very happy you organized this. You are muted, Yrjö.
Sorry. Thank you, Mia Petra, for this and for taking time for coming to this discussion. Thank you for what you said. And now we go to the question that has been hinted here. There have been a discussion in the chat about old media, that the old media also could be bad in a sense, as reminding people that actually radio was the thing for the Nazi Germany, where government offered radios so that everybody could listen to the propaganda. That was called Volksempfänger, if I remember right. But traditional media in today's context, it's of course something that has lost ground a little bit to social media in terms of political communication. That is to say, in the old days, that some of us remember quite well, when politicians wanted to talk to the people or the voters or citizens, whatever, they went to radio, they went to television, and of course they gave press conferences and interviews to newspapers and so on and so forth. At some point this changed. It's like a long time ago. Politicians found a direct way to address their citizens and their voters. And just turning to Mira now, and what happened and why the traditional media has sort of lost the grip of reporting politics, and what could be done to get a little bit journalism back into this business alongside the fact checkers and moderators, please.
Thank you so much, Jure. There are so many interesting questions here, so I'll try to connect a couple of previous threads of discussion, and also to continue on that note that I made. There is so much to unpack because this new technology has, of course, brought new relationships and new modes of communication, and we have a complete change, and of course in journalism as well. So we don't need journalists anymore to tell us what happened in the press conference. We don't need journalists to tell us exactly the details of every event, because we will find out really quickly on Twitter. And that change was slow to happen because most of the so-called news media were reporting news. However, a lot of journalists now, they say that the situation now is better for those who are finding successful models, because they can concentrate on in-depth reporting, investigations, being watchdogs over those in power, tracking organized crime, doing all those things that give us context around our political, social, and economic lives. And if you have good quality journalism to give that context, of course, the governments are more accountable. If you have that transparency and good reporting, you have better societies, and there are numerous studies to prove that. So to go back to your content is king. So when you have good content available to people, and as I said, we had years to figure out broadcasting, to introduce media pluralism rules in Europe, to introduce fairness doctrine in the US, and all the other regulatory and self-regulatory tools, like the press had self-regulation for many years, in the form of press councils where they agreed how to respect some basic ethical rules. What we have right now, what we had with this wild west of free market in digital and online is that the content is not a king anymore. It's more of a Cinderella, really. And that we don't have ways to monetize good content journalism online. Journalism is expensive. If you want to see how one of our investigative reporting members does fact-checking, they've just published an interesting story about that organized crime and corruption reporting project. You will see how expensive, painstaking, and elaborate that is. That kind of journalism doesn't have a business model at the moment, while misinformation and different types of fraud online are really profitable. And you can take a look at what Global Misinformation Index is reporting about that, and especially around COVID and vaccines. The business, underlying business model of programmatic advertising that sees the content basically as a necessity just to join eyeballs with advertising revenue, is actually still funding a lot of what we call malicious actors, especially those who are not in the English-speaking markets. So it's happening as we speak, and giving a context around vaccination, giving context around health, giving good investigative stories around corruption, climate change is very expensive and complicated for people to understand. And if the content engines are promoting easy, quick to consume, very sensational and low quality content, then of course societies will have much more difficult time making decisions around important issues like vaccines. So this is like the basic around our thinking around journalism. Now there are so many layers to unpack, and the question was, what would be the midterm measures? I don't think we had a chance to mention Digital Services Act and Digital Market Act that is at the moment being prepared in Europe as the probably first comprehensive regulation of this kind in the world that will probably set some standard. And Maria Luisa is looking, I know, is looking at those two pieces in depth, especially from the perspective what they mean for journalism. I will just finish at the middle layer that I see that hasn't been even scratched with all these discussions around content moderation and content regulation. And I think Mia Petra mentioned it when she said entities. What Trump has shown, what Parler platform has shown, that moderating only content is far away from addressing the real issues. And that is how different actors and entities operate in these practically online markets. They are big markets. And what are the roles and the rules and abilities? And if there are politicians, you know, they have megaphones, but are there any rules about balance, impartiality, any rules around political advertising? These are all the questions that the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, in combination with European Democracy Action Plan, are trying to respond. Now it's up to us, the civil society, to make sure that these come to the end of the consultation process in the form that really promotes human rights standards, quality content online, and of course the benefit for all our citizens.
Thank you, Mira. And thank you for taking the discussion already to this last subject, which is Digital Services Act and Digital Market Act. As it happens, after this our program, there is something called Eurovisioni 24, the International Day. This is we actually discovered that there was a clash between our events, but then in good EuroDIG traditions, we made an asset out of the liability. And so now we are suggesting that after we are finished, you could join to listen more about this subject, especially DSA and DMA, and the link is here on the chat, but we still have a few minutes here. So I would ask Maria Luisa about whether DSA, what kind of solution that could be for the problems we have been discussing here.
Thanks. Well, it's going to be difficult to kind of provide a clear view of the DSA and the DMA. What I think they will help us with in a couple of minutes. Maybe I can just focus on a couple of topics or a couple of perspectives that I think were raised or are necessary consequence of the very good points and challenges that have been mentioned in the different questions asked. Starting from the very beginning, I think DSA and DMA as initiatives that try to tackle the challenges that we have for the markets, the economy, but also for society with regards to the digital services and with regards to the digital markets is an ambitious plan, and it's most welcome. Also because if you think that the framework that we actually have in Europe at the moment dates 20 years back. And a lot has happened on those digital markets and services in 20 years. So we definitely needed something more that can mirror more and then can fit better in the reality as of today. What I would like to focus on, I think all the challenges that were raised in the questions, they have one thing in common, which is they do consider as a premise that these companies we are talking about, they have a possession of power. So the idea, for example, there are so many other complementary questions that we need to solve. It's self-regulation sufficient? Do we need to require to judges? Do we need to consider a middle way, et cetera, et cetera? But they all start from the assumption that we have a problem with a couple of giants out there. So I think and the DSA and the DMA, they seem to have a similar approach. They recognize that we have challenges and they try to regulate what these platforms are doing. They recognize, both of them, that we have very large online platforms that need additional obligations, or that we have gatekeepers that have a huge impact on markets and that they need an additional to-do list or not to-do list. So my impression is that both those pieces of legislation, they tend to assume that the status quo cannot be changed. There's the fact that we have these platforms, these big platforms, and only a handful of them. It's kind of given for granted, and we try to adjust the situation in a second step. Well, we don't contest that status quo. So my wonder that I would like to share with all of you is whether this has been debated sufficiently, whether there is sufficient consensus about the fact that the status quo is what we want in the years to come, and or whether we could have been, or we could be, because already we still have the possibility to do that. We could be a little bit more ambitious, at least as a starting point, and think about whether there are possible ways to have digital markets in 5 years from now, because all the legislations, they need to be debated at the European Parliament level and then at the Council level, and then I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of amendments and going back and forth, and then we need the enforcement. So we're talking about years from now. I wonder whether in years from now we need to already give up the idea of having the possibility for each of us to have a number of social media disposals, or to have the possibility to have to choose while you are on one social media, to choose who is the provider that select manages the recommendation system on that platforms for you. So for example, I am on Facebook, but I can plug in a different system for content moderation, or I'm on Twitter and I can do the same. So do we need, as users, as society, do we really want to give up on this thought already? I don't think so. I think we need yet a lot of discussions about this. And I think on that specific point, the DMA and the DSA, they could do more. There are actually tools to do that, which are not revolutionary either. They're part of the toolbox of traditional regulators. One of them is interoperability, for example. Interoperability is a good way to question the concentration of power in the hands of a few platforms only, because it has the potential to break up silos and it has the potential to give users a lot of choices. The way interoperability is considered in the DMA is very minimal, and it's limited to ancillary services. And in the DSA, it doesn't seem to be included at all. So I was wondering why so? Why we have already kind of submit to this situation? And as civil society and as civil society fighting for free speech, I think we shouldn't do that. So my main comment and reaction to the DSA and the DMAs, this is definitely needed. It's a welcome initiative, but maybe we should consider to be a little bit more ambitious. Also because hopefully the European Union has the chance now to set a standard for the entire, for the global regulation of those platforms. And also, I don't think we are going to have a similar occasion anytime soon. So whatever we decide today is going to be our playing field for the next decade or decades.
Thank you very much for, well, what you're saying is that we should set our sights higher. We should be more ambitious and not just accept that we are vassals of the new feudal arrangement, and we, instead of just getting more rice under the system, perhaps the system could be changed. And thank you very much for that optimistic perspective. Now we have 10 minutes time more. I just wonder if this last topic and these thoughts that Maria Luisa came with, anybody would like to say a few words, comments on them. You can raise your hand or just take the floor. Yes. I don't see any hands here. So, Michael, could you just perhaps we just summarize this discussion? There's been a lot of discussion in the chat, so just give us a brief summary of that, and then we have to stop and for people who want to join the other program. Michael, please.
Sure. I'm a little biased because I'm also one of the people that's fueling the chat, so apologies there. But we've had some really good back and forth about kind of how do we take this forward? What is the role of EuroDIG in this, and not just convening these kinds of conversations, but also in bringing together our community, those that are already involved, those that are affiliate networks and whatnot, in getting these kinds of discussions together to also think about solutions. So for instance, who can we bring together, especially considering that the planning period is opening soon? What kind of how can we use the space that we have to push this kind of policy, or to kind of create, whether it's best practice or just multi-stakeholder policy discussion on this issue at this very critical time. That's something that's been very well captured, but I think that both the discussion and the chat is that this is really a good time, really a critical time for us to be moving on these issues. Some other things that we discussed was there was a lot of back and forth about the sustainability of journalism and news media, and that's one of the biggest challenges, is that so much of the issues that we're facing now as it relates to content regulation, a lot of times that doesn't include the elements that are also very important, and that's market regulation, as Mira has discussed, and I know Isa is basically one of our kind of leading experts on as well. So this is something that is really so important. And we spoke about some of the different models that are already kind of existing, including Journalism Trust Initiative and NewsGuard, to help on some front with creating more credible journalism, but also we shared some information about how Australia has a very good, well, we consider it very good. Of course, it's maybe I shouldn't use such value-loaded words, but let's say Australia has a very interesting approach to how they're thank you. They're addressing news media sustainability and competition as it relates to digital platforms. I've put a link in the chat if you'd like to see more, but there's basically what's going on in Australia and what's going on in the EU has very much the opportunity to set a strong standard going forward in this space. So it's really important that we not only monitor those and learn from these different approaches, but we do what we can to help shape those as well, based on the expertise of our community and what we can bring to the table, which is quite a lot.
Thank you, Michael. We have just a few minutes left, and I think that I would like to give the floor to Sandra to finish this off, because as Michael said, many of these things actually we have been discussing. This is almost like the start of the planning meeting of EuroDIG, of the next next regular EuroDIG, which we will have in a few days. So that Sandra, would you like to finish this off? Thank you.
Thank you, Yrjö, and thank you everyone for this lively discussion, which was a pleasure to follow. I see already in the chat and from what I heard that there are new ideas now that possibly are not captured by the call for issues, but that came basically from the latest developments. Due to, or to stick to a good process, it would be appropriate if you raise that during the next planning meeting or send an email to the Secretariat so that we have it on the record, basically. And then I think we have all possibilities to offer a day zero spot for the Dynamic Coalition on Sustainability of Journalism, or we can also include that into a session. We can add a session. The program is not yet carved in stone, so there are all possibilities. If there is need to continue this discussion, we would be also happy to offer another spot like this. I think Friday morning seems to be a good time. Maybe that could be a regular meeting point for hot topic discussions, either on this topic, but also I think if we get good feedback on this, then we will consider this for other topics too, and to make a series of EuroDIG Extras Friday morning or any other time. So just let us know, your feedback is welcome, also how we could improve. And I would like again to hint you to this event that is now taking place also virtually, but organized by Eurovisioni from Italy. They have quite high-level speakers. Roberto Viola from the European Commission will be speaking, but also people from Facebook. Of course, they are a much bigger organization than we are, so they had good opportunities to involve those high-level speakers. We recommend to join that too. You can follow it on YouTube, on Facebook, but you can also register to the Zoom meeting, so then you have more interactive opportunities. Rainer is just showing the link again. You will also find it on our website. and it is also further up in the chat. And so that could be a day of focusing on this issue of media, social media, Digital Service Act, and so on and so forth. And with this, I would like to close this meeting, thank our speakers, thank our participants, and I'm looking forward to meeting you online soon and physically, hopefully not in a too long time from now. So stay healthy, take care, and it was a pleasure seeing you. Bye-bye.